Okay, cool. And I'm just gonna keep talking. And you know what? I'm gonna say this real fast. First of all, Andrew, I'm glad you're here. We're both we made it to Zoom, even though we almost didn't again. But I did have the person who edits my podcast says that these start sometimes too conversationally, like they miss the beginning. But in this case, you did miss the beginning, listeners, and I'm not going to tell you what we talked about. So have fun with that.
It's just like
But
hidden information. Hidden
right, right,
information.
right. We know, and maybe one friend who I text about it knows, and that's it. But yeah. So anyway, I'm glad you're here. How you feeling today?
I'm feeling good. I
Cool.
got up early and drove down to a coffee shop, and that's like my happy place when I am
Nice.
able to go out and like there's something about the vibe of being in a coffee shop really early in the morning that is
Mhm.
like super grounding for me. So, I'm feeling great.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah, yeah. I'm glad. I'm glad you got something in that now we can ease into this in like a nice, comfortable way. And it's funny because we haven't talked much. I found you on Instagram because of your new book, I think. I don't remember how that happened. Maybe it was uh, you know, just a random chance. But I broke the rules when you sent me the digital copy, and I read the entire thing. I just like I blasted through it, and I know at the beginning of the book you say do not blast through this, take your time. But I do plan on getting the book and going through it little by little now. But I was just like I was so enthralled with all of it, and it reflected such a truth about being human that I was like, I got to get to all of it. So the book, I want to get into it so much. Um, Unmasking the Inner Critic is what it's called. Um, I'm very happy you're here, and I'm just so excited to get into all of this.
Yeah, yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to share. I think it's really cool. So, I have some like random thoughts of mine on social media. I was never a big social media user, and in the last year, I think about 7 or 8 months ago, I realized I had this moment in my life, and it was a little bit of a crisis. I had been writing blog posts around spirituality, embodiment. How do we do this inner work? How do we wrestle with our inner narratives, these stories we tell ourselves about ourselves? But I'd kept that out of the public sphere where people knew me, right? So I
Mhm.
compartmentalized it. And then my Instagram was mostly just a bunch of pictures of trees and friends and me. And about 7 or 8 months ago, I realized this compartmentalization that I'd done doesn't feel good. There's something off here. And that I know no, like all my friends are gonna still be my friends when they see this other huge part of me that's always been this huge part of me. And so I started writing on Instagram, and it has been really healing and just really cool. I think a lot of people think of Instagram as a place where you share your life with lots of people, and that's its main use. And the real use is for Instagram and Facebook to get all of our data. But the other use that I have found really helpful is it's allowed me to connect one on one with people that there's no way in the world I would have connected with otherwise. So I was pumped when you reached out to me, and I
Right.
think I'm just like stoked.
Yeah, it's funny you say that too because I've always been naturally selective on what I show people in terms of like, and I think we all are, but I was really worried about it, because I had to be this exact version of myself that I was showing, which your book gets all into. But Instagram was one of the tools that helped me break out of that. And I slowly started just sharing like the weirdest, whatever I felt was, not Sean like, and it ended up being leaning into spirituality and feelings and being
Mhm.
vulnerable. And I started being more and more vulnerable. And what happened is I don't really have an audience, so to speak, but I have a community of people that I've met. And it's just like I don't care about audience, but I care about community. And it feels like I've gathered little pieces. I'm just like plucking them from the side of the road as I walk down my version of this. And they're just now they're like really good friends. Like
Yeah.
I've gotten a couple people that I consider some of my closest friends just from Instagram DMs or like whatever. Like
Yeah.
it's amazing. It's an amazing tool for us to connect if we use it that way. But I'm just like any tool, it can be used for destructive things as well.
I will name that one of the shifts that has happened in the last 2 or 3 weeks is I have a phone app blocker that I downloaded, and I only get on any of my social media between 10 and 12, and then again between 3 and 5. And within those windows, I give myself 20-minute chunks. So
That's
I'm
awesome,
only on social media now 40 minutes a day. And
dude.
that is I know my personality, and I know that those are guardrails that are important for me.
That's awesome. I need that
Yeah.
actually because like I have, even when I'm at work, I'm in a cubicle, so it's easy to just pick it up, check it, look, whatever. And it's funny because it almost kind of reminds me of some of this just stuff that comes up in your book where there's other reasons that I'm doing the things that I'm doing.
Mm.
There's levels to things to where, when I pick it up, and it might just be habitual, and the smart guys at Instagram knowing how to hook me and make me addicted, but also I'm looking for something. Like I'm
Yeah.
looking, like I open it up and I hope that I have a message, or I hope that someone likes something, and then if I just look at it for a second, I realize like it didn't do anything really for me. Like it
Hmm.
didn't do, I mean, aside from maybe I do get a good message from somebody, and some way to connect, and that's great to recognize as well, but sometimes it's just it's it's easy to get sucked into, but it's also worthwhile to an access point to recognize some need that I have, or I feel that I have.
Yeah. Can we talk about habits and rituals really quick?
Oh, what? I have rituals on my list, so
Oh,
of
so
things to
good.
talk about. So yeah, yeah.
So this is something I've been working with in the last couple of weeks because I'm doing a workshop in January here in the Seattle area on rituals. And there's this book, The Power of Ritual. I'm going to butcher his last name, but it's Casper Turkuli.
Okay.
Um, and he breaks rituals down as things that we do with intention, attention, and repetition. Right. So we're intentional about it. We have focus around it. That's our attention. And then we do it again and again and again. And there's a distinction there between, I think, a lot of the habits that we have, certainly that I have. I have habits where I am pretty much on autopilot, but I do them every day. Coffee is probably my biggest example, my earliest example for sure, every day.
Hmm.
This is a habit that I do, but intention isn't really there. Attention most days isn't really there. It's just like I'm just there to get the coffee. And so I think one of the depth practices that we can begin to invite into our lives is take a look at the habits that you have and how do you apply intention, attention to those things that you're already doing repeatedly so that you can get a quality of depth to them. And some things you don't need to, right? Like maybe coffee doesn't need to be the all holy moment of my day, but how can we structure some rituals into our days that are simple, basic, but bring us to a quality of intention and depth that helps us to understand what's actually going on in us. So
Right.
I think that habit and ritual is really for folks who feel like they're running on autopilot. I think that can be an easier first step to take is what are the things
Yeah.
you're currently doing? How do you add intention and attention to them?
Right. I mean, intention. I mean, both intention and attention. It's such a good thing because it's it's so easy to go through a whole day without knowing why you did everything you did. You know what? And it's just like, and even, because I'm pretty routine. I have a good routine, and I have a good like exercise routine and meditation routine. But a lot of times, let's use exercise, for example. If I bring my phone with me, because I use it for Spotify, I also between sets, I'll open up Instagram, and then before I'll start texting people. And sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm socializing with some people and I have downtime to text. That's fine. But also I'll miss my entire workout. Like I'll be
Yeah.
like, it's gone. And it's because, it lacked, and it should have intention. Like I have an intention, but I lost it because I added this other element to the mix. And just remembering that, like if throughout your day you could stop and be like, okay, what's my intention, that alone, like you said, would be a game changer.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. My brother just texted me this morning, and he also has some sort of app blocker on his phone. And my brother and I are very different personality types. He's very intellectual. There's a lot of, he sees the world through his cognitive lens as the primary lens. And so he has this app blocker, and he texts me this morning. He goes, turns out bathroom trips don't need to be nearly as long.
Mm,
Like if everything's blocked, you're really kind of in
right.
and out. And I've thought about that for the last couple hours, because what that really is, especially for those of us who cognitive lens is our primary lens, right? Where intellectualism is where we feel like we're getting value, where learning, and knowledge is our, we hoard knowledge, that kind of personality. I think what the one of the issues with that is that we step into spaces and we're going through Instagram, or we're scrolling through the news, and we're thinking we're gaining value in our lives because we're attaining more knowledge. And my question is, where are you embodying anything that you're currently learning?
Mhm.
And that's where I think our as a culture and a society, there's a disconnect between knowledge and learning and intellectual stimulation. And all right, but how the hell is that impacting how you show up? Like,
Right. Like, is it
what
useful at all?
is it useful at all? At
Mhm.
all?
Yeah.
In how you're showing up, and is it healing? Is it healing for you? Um,
Right.
because I know me, and I've known when I've gone down those rabbit holes, uh, and I get to the end, I'm like, wow, I just learned so much, and also I feel like garbage.
Right.
So I
Yeah.
think there's a little bit of all of that in there.
It's funny too, because as you say that, it makes me think about just, you know, any type of embodiment in terms of like recognizing that you do feel like garbage,
Mm,
recognizing that like after the thing, because, and I'm not bashing, having, scrolling and having time for that. Like you said, you actually made time for that, or,
hmm
sitting in front of Netflix and watching a couple episodes of Seinfeld or something. Like, you should laugh, you should do the thing, you should dig into rabbit holes and all this stuff. But
hmm
occasionally, like, because those things, they're set up to kind of take over. At least the apps and they set them up to kind of take over. They want you to watch 10 episodes, or they want you to scroll for 5 hours a day or 7 hours a day.
Yeah.
And if you could just recognize how you feel after, I feel like that would be such a beneficial thing. But a lot of times it seems like, instead of recognizing that maybe our what we're absorbing externally is making us feel heavy and hollow, or somehow both, maybe if we could just, I think a lot of times what happens is then we start blaming other things outside and saying, well,
Yeah.
that's the thing that made me feel like it's not, all of a sudden I have this, I'm sitting scrolling all day, and my what I'm absorbing is like not very nutritious. And then I go out on the road and I'm mad at everyone on the road, and I'm saying it's all their fault, or I'm mad at my coworkers. And it's just like, maybe it's not that. Maybe
Yeah.
it's also all the things that you're absorbing and not recognizing how they're impacting you.
Yeah. I think there's something to be said around, if someone in your life is constantly coming up to you and monopolizing your time, right? If someone is just consistently coming to you and taking all of your time, your energy, what you have to offer, the healthy thing is to set boundaries, right? And
Mhm.
so with social media, we have we have something that has been designed to consistently come to us and monopolize our time. And yet so many of us don't set boundaries. We think that we're strong enough to just, I'll just stop swiping whenever, but they're designed to keep you going. I think similarly, there's this imagery that has been valuable for me of the curmudgeon and the dancer.
Okay.
And the curmudgeon, we all kind of have an image of what a curmudgeon is, right?
Mhm.
It's a person who has gotten older, who has no connection with their inner life, who has basically taken on the hurts and the harms and the fears and the insecurities of their life, and without uh, deepening into some other space within them, without wrestling and working with those things, they project them outwards, and it becomes spiritually harmful, manipulative, emotionally abusive. And so I think for a lot of us, we run on autopilot for so long, swiping or or doing whatever, we run on autopilot for so long that we inevitably become curmudgeonly, and
Mhm.
we don't recognize that we don't feel good. We don't feel whole. And the first person who's going to tell us that, something's up is because we have projected something outward. We've said,
Mhm.
you're the problem. You're the reason I feel this way. That person over there is the issue. I'm going to scapegoat that one. And I think on the other hand, and side note, I think that is so much of our, like, people can be curmudgeons. I also think like institutions can be curmudgeonly
Right.
um, when they choose comfort and status quo, right? I think it's pretty easy for institutions to become curmudgeonly. But I think on the other hand, there's this energy of what I call the dancer. And in my mind, it's this image of this older woman who has this curious glint in her eye, and she looks out into the world and just like looks at the mess and looks at the absolute nonsense, and she just has this like half smirk going, and she's like, what a wonderful, beautiful I think of like Mary Oliver being
Mhm.
like, wow, we're all just part of the family of things, and like shit's
Right.
messed up,
Right.
but like there's so much beauty here. And so
Right.
I wonder, how do we shift from our curmudgeonly energy to really leaning into the dancer energy? And how do we learn to notice when our body is feeling constricted, when our body's trying to tell us something's up, before we start projecting that harm outward?
Right. And it's because it's not as if the tough stuff is going away.
No.
You know, it's not as if you can just be like, oh, if I keep, working on myself, there's nothing that'll affect me from the outside. Every day something is going to hit you.
Yeah.
Like that's just what it is. But it's interesting to know that although it's not bad to feel bad. It's not, we're not saying that, but to know that you do have an option to dance, so to speak, like you
Yeah.
do have an option to do that. And because sometimes as you were talking, especially about the curmudgeon, it made me think of sometimes, when we talk about this kind of stuff, I'll run into some people who are just like, well, it's life. Life
Yeah.
sucks. It's just like, oh, I don't want to do that. Like it's I don't feel like I'm gonna be here long enough to spend a bunch of time on just like, well, stuff sucks. And it's just
Yeah.
like what it is. And it's like it it is stuff. Stuff is stuff. And it's challenging. But I like the image of just, that dancer, that idea that in in a lot of cases you can still frolic, you know?
Yeah. It's the this is a I know this gets said all over the place, but it's the power of the and, right? Stuff
Mhm,
sucks, and
mhm,
like there's still amazing beauty. I think of so I'm trained as a high school teacher. I taught humanities for 7 years, so history and English language arts in the same classroom. And one of my favorite topics to teach on was the Black Panther Party.
mhm.
And so this is just one micro story, but they were formed out of immense police brutality in the Oakland area. And immense pain and harm. And in the midst of that, they created so many programs that were community centered, that were educating their kids, that were focused on making sure that kids were fed before they went to these schools that didn't have free and reduced lunch programs or breakfast programs yet. Right. And so, how do we say, this sucks? This is not the condition of the world that we want to live in. And we dance and we create and we're generative in the midst of it, because that's not only what the world needs in order to shift, that's also what we need in order to create beautiful community in the midst of it. um I think about that so much, because what it comes down to for me is, how do we change the way we walk from wanting to see a different world, which I think I would love to see a different world, but first, how do we change the mechanisms that are within us that allow us really, so shifting from what we see to how we see. Let's focus
Mhm.
on how we see the world first, because that will inevitably turn into how we engage with the world.
Right. And it's almost what I'm hearing. It's like there's not maybe as big of a distinction between your inner self and what's happening externally.
Yeah.
Like in the world, I'm not blaming everybody for all the terrible things that are happening and have happened, but there is there is part of that mixed up in you too. So I like that, because I know that was another one of my notes, is just like how much of what this inner work and what this self-reflection does externally, and how does it kind of ripple out. And that's a perfect example of that.
Yeah, there's a near the beginning of the book, I share the story of Thomas Merton's parable of the spring and the stream, and I really find some value in it. So I'll share it really quick.
Mm-hmm.
Every one of us has a spring within us. It's our spring of contemplation, our inner life. If you pray, if that's language you use, it's your prayer life. It's the way you touch with the essence of who you are within yourself. And so we have this spring. I imagine like the hot springs at Yellowstone, but without the smell and like promise of certain death.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then we also have streams that flow out of that spring. And these streams are how we show up in the world. They are the actions we take. They're the ways that we're engaging. And what he says is that if we don't engage in those actions, if we have no outlet, then our streams are going to dry up. And what happens to that pool within us, that spring within us? It becomes stagnant. It becomes okay with the status quo. It becomes this kind of feeling of lukewarm. It just is what it is. Things suck, right? And yet the other side, if we're not nourishing our spring, then those streams will dry up. And so I think about this a lot with the activist friends I have. And I was involved in activism up in Seattle for a couple of years. And what I saw again and again and again were activists that were going, but had spent no time nourishing their inner lives. And so they were trying to draw upon a well that just wasn't there. It was dry. And so I think that's the interplay, is how do we nourish this inner life that we have and engage in actions in the world that are healing and supportive for others? Because if you only do one, it's not going to work. You got to
Right.
do both. And I think that's Merton's point. And then that's a lot of the contemplative activists that I follow say the same
Yeah.
thing again and again.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too where it feels like, I mean, I love that obviously, and it's one of those things too where if you're doing the best you can inwardly, and you're not an activist, or you don't think you're impacting your community as much as you should. I mean, there are ways to follow that, and if that's something you want to do, but also like within your family and within your workplace, and like these count. Like that is the community. Like this definitely counts. And it's like I just want to throw that in there, because sometimes I would feel bad. I'm like, well, I'm not doing anything to, if you see the news and you're just like, I'm not doing anything to help any of that. It's like, and hopefully I can get to a point where I am, but at the same time, it's like, the people around you, all of that counts.
Yeah. Something that reframed it for me was the big giant picture, the societal stuff that really like way too big. We have no idea how to connect with. So that feeling of like, I don't know what to do about that. What changed the game for me is looking at that big stuff and saying, what is the energy that is allowing that to happen? What's the energy behind that? And where is that energy in my family or my workplace or my local community, my neighborhood? And how can I work to listen to the folks that are in those spaces and being hurt, and then engage there?
Wow.
Because that is a mindset. That was certainly a huge mindset shift for me of like, yeah, you're right. I can't do anything about some of those massive national, international issues, but I know that the energy behind that is otherization and dehumanization and XYZ. And that is stuff I see right here in my own family, in my own neighborhood, and I can do something about that. So I think that's a mental shift that allows us to stay on the hook. And I think
Mm-hmm.
being on the hook is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So staying on the hook and accountable to our local community and our families.
Yeah, I think that's really good way of putting it. That's gonna sit with me for sure. Just recognizing that the same, yeah, that same energy, that same thing that
Mm-hmm.
grew into this international problem is within some of the people that or
Yeah.
yourself. And that's a game changer for sure. And there's something else that you said within there, which I have to bring up because it was something I wanted to bring up, because you used "it is what it is" as kind of like a, oh, well, it is what it is, like kind of a curmudgeon-y thing. But in your book, I think you know where I'm going. In your book, I loved this part, that this is like one of the things I wrote down, is you have a follow-up to "it is what it is." And I will say, because my brother is actually a person that me and him have always, he's always hated "it is what it is." And I was like, well, I see the value in it, but I wasn't able to articulate why, until I read your book, and I was like, oh, I needed the second part. So do you mind sharing that a little bit?
Yeah. And this, I'll share some origin story of it right before
Cool.
I do it. This comes from the English teacher in me, like
Oh, nice.
100%. I like looking at phrases and breaking down, like, what is the purpose of this phrase? And so the statement of "it is what it is," when it is left alone, well, before even that, "it is what it is" a statement of identification. I see something as it is, right? And so if you don't do anything else with it, it's a statement of identification and then letting yourself off the hook. It is what it is. And now I'm going to walk over there and get some mac and cheese.
Mhm.
Like, whatever, I'm moving
Right.
on. I think the next piece there is, it is what it is. And how can I be present with it in a loving way?
Mm.
So the way that I work with that, because that moves from identification, how can I see this in a way that is real, that is as clear-eyed as I have the tools to see, and without judgment. So just seeing something, it is what it is. Let's get real about what we're seeing. No good, bad, in, out, up, down. It is what it is. This is it. And then how can I be present with it in a loving way? You can do this with multiple, either inwardly or outwardly. So I'll walk you through the practice that I use. Inwardly, when an emotion comes up, for me, it's typically anger. Sometimes it's like this grief that kind of sneaks up on me. Um, I'll use this, "it is what it is." All right, I'm feeling anger. Just objectively, that's what I'm experiencing. And how can I be present with it in a loving way? What does that anger need right now? How can I sit with it, see it, not walk away from it? And then what does it need? How can I be a loving force for it? Does it need um, me to be journaling? Does it need to go hit a box, a punching bag?
Mhm.
Right? Is this an embodied anger that, like, do I need to hop on the bike and just go? Do I need to go for a walk? But how can I be present with it in a loving way? That helps me to slow, focus, and then engage it in a way that's healing and not harmful. On the other hand, you can use that same phrase outwardly. And so when you're walking down the street, if you live in a city and you see just the sheer amount of homelessness and housing insecurity that's in most of our cities right now, it's become so easy to run on autopilot and not even get to the first part of that phrase where you see what's
Mm.
happening. And so that phrase um, shifts us into identification mode. It is what it is. I see harm happening. I see homelessness. I see housing insecurity. And then how can I be present with these people? How can I be present with this person right in front of me in a healing way? That doesn't mean a saving, correcting, fixing, advising, right? That doesn't mean that. A healing way might be, in that moment, making sure that I look at that person eye to eye. Or if they are asking for something that I can easily do,
Mhm.
then do it. I
Right.
think that's one thing I grew up with. This is a small side note, but
Mhm.
when we talk about people who are asking for money, something that I grew up with was the story I didn't actually know. It was the assumption that they're going to do something bad with it. So don't give. And one of the things that I've had to really rework is that's a story that I have. That's not anything they have said. That is a story that I have that lets me off the hook of being accountable to the human being in front of me. And so let that leave. Let my desire for control over that moment leave and just be present with this person in a healing way.
Right.
How can I support if it's within my capacity to support? And
Right.
so that phrase, I think I really think of it as a tool. You can use it inwardly, you can use it outwardly, but it shifts us to how do we see the world for exactly as it is, and how do we make sure we're engaging in a relational, healing, and intentional way?
Right. I mean, like you just said, it comes back to some intention. It's just like there's sometimes there's just these words that just keep coming up, and they
Yeah.
keep having value in all these different contexts. And that's really good, because there's a lot of, I mean, even I feel like in that situation, if you see someone, asking for money on the side of the road, and I feel like there's an opportunity for using that phrase inward and outwardly, because you probably
Mhm.
are feeling things in that moment too.
Yeah.
Like, you feel uncomfortable, or you feel like it's all stuff, it's all this Play-Doh that you then get to like work with. And it's like, man, it's all there, but it's not easy either. Like, and
No.
it's not something that's supposed to be comfortable.
Yeah. And it's so, what you just said was so important. It starts with your body, because most of us, our bodies are responding to our experiences before our brains can catch up. Right.
Mhm.
So when we're walking down the street, the first thing is just like, what's my body feeling?
Right.
That's so good. That's so
Uh,
real.
yeah, I mean that happens so much. And just
Yeah.
checking in with, like, man, it's so weird how many little things, like awareness of how you feel in your body, and checking in. I mean, I can't tell you how many times a day I'll be like, "You okay, buddy?" And I'm just talking to
Hmm.
myself. I'll
Yep.
just like a little check in, or like pat my leg a little bit and be like, "All right, man, you okay, buddy?" And it
Yep.
happens so often, and you think that it would feel like cheesy and silly. It feels so good,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
Because, we've been taught that it's cheesy and silly, right? We've been
Right.
taught to be disembodied. And so actually treating ourselves as a human and not, I think about my body. I was trained to see my body as a vehicle for my brain. That is 100% real. I don't think I was ever told that explicitly, but that was the implicit understanding, is that your body, it's okay to disregard all of its needs. It's okay to not have any idea what its language is, because your brain will do the heavy work. And I think that is so much garbage.
Right.
And part of the deepening process, part of the getting the hell off this autopilot that so many of us are on, is step one, just what's my body feeling in this moment? And ask yourself that question every day for 30 days.
Right.
Um, because that's we go back to those three words of ritual, right? Intention, attention, and repetition. That's the mechanism. Doing things with those three, that's the mechanism through which we build the capacity to step into a new way of being.
Right.
That's it. How do you find the things that are healthy and healing, and find ways to do that every single day over and over and over again? And in 30 years, you'll be a dancer and not a curmudgeon, or at least
Right.
you'll dance more and curmudge less.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You know what? I love that you added that, because it's not that we're trying to be one thing. It's not
No.
that you're never going to be a curmudgeon. That's fine. Like, that
Yeah.
part, curmudgeoning is part of the dance, you could argue.
Yes. Yeah. Oh,
Know?
100%.
Like,
100%. Yeah.
and I love the idea that of not seeing your body as a tool.
Mm.
Because I've been thinking about that a lot lately with my eyes in particular. I'm like, they're always working. They're always just, and not working as in functionally, but they're always like, look at this, pick this up. Here's the next task. Here's the next task. Like, it's always, or even if it's trying to be present, or if I'm looking at a tree, I'll be like, all right, now we'll feel, like, whatever. It's like they're always grabbing. I'm like, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of time off, and you can just look. Don't even tell me what that thing is called. Don't even tell me it's called a tree.
Yeah.
Let's just look, and you guys just have fun for a while without a task. And all it did is, as weird as that might sound to somebody, all it did was recognize that the body, although it is a great indicator of how we feel and whatnot, isn't exclusively for these tasks that we're always.
Yeah.
They're not just tools. Like, we can um, use it in a different way. We can be in it in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a friend who really was a mental shift for me that has turned into a very embodied shift. He's a poet here in the Tacoma, Seattle area. And his name's James Pearson, one of the great, like, best, young poets I think I've met in person. Just phenomenal. Anyway, so we're going to the beach, and we're out walking, and we're walking along this wooded trail, and all of a sudden he just like dips and takes a left turn into the shrubbery. And I'm
Mhm.
like, what's happening? But he walks these trails all the time. It's part of his practice. And so I know that he knows where he's going. So I follow him, and he says, we're going on a ramble. And I'm thinking, I don't know what the hell that means, but
No.
I trust you. Let's take this where it goes. And what it turned into is we basically scaled down this hillside, climbing along the roots, holding onto the roots as we went down, 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 and then until we got to the beach. That was step one of me being like, I just did something I have not done since I was a kid, and I loved doing as a kid, but
Mhm.
I have been told that that's not what adults do unless they're professional climbers.
Right.
And then the step two was, so we're walking along the beach, and next thing he goes over and he just starts walking along this log. And, he gets up on this log and is balancing and kind of jumping from log to log, something I haven't done since I was a little kid. And what he said is, I'm playing.
Mm.
And it hit me like a ton of bricks. When was the last time I played?
Mhm.
Like, yes, I engage in games sometimes. I like going bowling. But when
Mm.
was the last time I played? Just
Mhm.
like completely free form. This is what my body wants to do right now. That is an experience I have not had. And so, in so long. And so I've been trying since that moment of like, whoa, I've been trying to, whenever I go walking, okay, do I want to walk over there right now? Great. Let's do it. Do I
Mhm.
want to walk over there? Do I want to just stare at this tree for a second? Great. Let's do
Mhm.
it. Just like
Dude.
follow your body.
Dude, I literally did that yesterday. And it was so cool because I went I had the day off and I went to a place that I always go when I have free time. And then as I was driving home, I saw like a conservation area. So I just like pulled off and I was like, okay, I don't, and there was no clear indication of where the trails went. And I remember the first one, I was like, I'm just gonna see what's around this corner. And then I was like,
Mm.
I'm just gonna see what's around this corner. And then all of a sudden there was three paths. And I was like, uh-oh. And let me throw this out. Anytime I'm in like any wilderness at all, 80% of the time I'm like, where are the bears at? Like I'm
Yeah.
definitely gonna like there's definitely a hungry bear here, and he's definitely gonna look at me as appetizing. But for the rest of the time, I was just like, all right. And I ended up going down and I found like a little creek that had just like rocks everywhere. And so I just started like finding my favorite rocks. And I was just putting rocks in my pockets. And I was just like, man, I feel like and it had that same feel where I was just like, how many adults I just don't feel like you're supposed to have rocks in your pockets unless you know about
Yeah.
rocks and you know what you're doing. And I remember at one point I was looking up at the trees and I stretched my arms out and I was like, I'm going to be big like the trees. And I was just like doing these things and I was like, you're being silly, right? But it was this weird dynamic in my head, like where it was hard to be fully present playing because I was doing it. It's like my body wanted to do it.
Yeah.
There's something in me that wanted to just be there playing. And then all of a sudden I would go back and forth between like, okay, you're being silly. And then sometimes being like, look, you're doing it. You're being childlike. And it's like, well, no, you're not anymore because now we're like saying we are. And it was like this weird whole thing that was going on. But in the end, I did, even for fractions, find those spots where I was. And it's funny because there was a log and I did think I want to walk on that. And I didn't because I was like, I might get wet.
Mm.
I had like a reason, as if it mattered, as if I got wet, someone would, put me in timeout or something.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it's funny to notice those things and notice that it's still in you, that it didn't go away.
Yeah.
Like the playfulness didn't go away.
Yeah, it's there. And so when we're not giving it space, like I think that's what I really mean. That's an additional layer of what I mean around constrictions. When we don't give space to these stories within us, including, in the book I list out 9 of those core constrictions. I'm not lovable, I'm not good enough, I'm not in control. There's also constrictions within us that form around not giving our 12-year-old self room to breathe, right? That 5-year-old self that was part of me is still in me because I've transcended and included it over and over and over, right? And so I think that's also part, is if we don't give our younger selves, if we don't give the playful part of us, or these parts of us that brought us joy and might still bring us joy, if we don't give those space, those parts of us room to stretch and breathe and dance and play, we constrict. There's
Mm-hmm.
maybe not outwardly, but a little part of us learns this is not okay to show. And so I'm going to hold it tight. I'm going to button it down. I'm going to
Right.
close it off. And we do that over and over and over and over and over again. And there's just so much grief. And that's where I consistently think about how much all of us are grieving. Yes, with the big things. Yes, with all the stuff of life, the stuff that we're in the midst of, personally, collectively. And I think we're all in grief because human beings are constantly changing, which
Mm-hmm.
means in small micro ways, we've got to be constantly grieving the parts of us that we're closing off because society says it's no longer acceptable.
Right.
Ugh.
It, I mean, it's such a thing, and it's funny because like even even if you don't catch those things as they're happening, even if you don't catch the moments your child self got to come out for a minute, even in hindsight, it's valuable because even as you're talking, I remember after the rock collecting incident, I spent time with my mom yesterday and I showed her the rocks I found. And
Awesome.
in hindsight, I'm like, I lit like a 37-year-old man was like, look what rocks I found, mom. And I was like, this one looks like it's chocolate filled, like because it had a little brown. It's just like what, and now in hindsight, I'm like, that was little me. And I was still like going up
Mm,
to the people that I, wanted the look what I found. Look, and all I'm doing was exploring. That's all I was doing,
yeah.
which is really all we're doing, period. But we're kind of taught to do it the right way.
Yeah.
And we almost lose some of the joy in that. Like you lose some of the ability to dance, so to speak, because the right way, as if that's a thing, but we're taught that, and it's not our fault that we're taught that, and it's not anyone else's fault that they're taught that, but it's it's a hard thing to recognize, but so valuable, I think.
Yeah. We're taught to explore productively,
Oh,
right?
great. Yep.
Like we're taught to explore to the extent that we are gaining something we can use.
Wow. Yeah.
And I think that's why. So I'll name that for the last couple of years, I taught for 7 years. I left teaching. I came back to it. Then I've left it again. I work in teacher training, and I see a world not far away from me where I don't work in education. And so I'm bouncing through all these things, and everywhere I go, there's a huge amount of folks that are just exhausted by their work, depressed by their experience of their work, just sad, angry, frustrated. And I think that's part of it, is that we hmm, we have been taught so much that what we do and need to do has to be productive, and productive to the point of monetizing the next product, scaling the business, meeting objectives, when really the whole point of exploration is the fun newness of looking into the world with wide eyes and saying, wow.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at a couple of weeks ago, I was doing some research and I was looking at the data of people who are in their jobs, and just, this is pulling data on satisfaction, happiness, and it's awful.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder, what does it mean for folks who are stuck inside jobs to create space outside of their jobs where they can play?
Right.
Young parents, I think, get it in micro doses because they have permission to play with their young kids. I
Mm-hmm.
experienced this certainly with my 3 and 4-year-old. Um, that said, it's also paired with this like pretty consistent, just like, holy shit, am I failing these kids? Am
Mm-hmm.
I doing something wrong? Is this my fault in every moment? And so
Mm-hmm.
I think there's that question, though, of how do we expand our activities in the day to include more play, even if it's 15-minute walk while you're working, you're going to go outside, you're going to look around, and you're going to practice wide-eyed, just staring at some trees
Right.
and going where your body wants to take you.
For sure. And it's one of those things too, like, and I know everyone's workplace is not conducive to playfulness, but
Mhm.
sometimes, like you said, in micro ways, there can be like you remember, everyone remembers being in class and you had the one friend that you could like look over to and like giggle at when anything, like you're like, what the heck just that, like, just realizing that like we're still kind of there. Like, I mean, I like a lot of my coworkers, and I've kind of created a to maybe the detriment of some people's outlook on my work ethic. I've created a kind of persona where I might not take everything so seriously. But the reason I do that is for this exact thing, like and it could be tiny little things. Like I have a coworker who is in my line of sight, and I've just been practicing my winking, every time I can. Like I'll just wink, and I'm like, I just want to be good at this. That seems like a cool skill to have, like especially when I'm older, because it feels more magical when an older person winks at you, and I
Yeah.
want to be able to do that. Or like the other day, the HR person came by and they looked in my cubicle. There's nothing in my cubicle, that no decorations, no pictures, but there's a stick that I found. There's a perfect walking stick. And then I found a feather and I tacked the feather onto the top of the walking stick. And she's like, "Why do you have a feather on a stick in your?" I couldn't explain it. I was just like, "Well, it's a it's a good stick." I found it, and then the feather, it looks cool, right? Like it's just a thing. And in those, but it could be these little micro things that you do that just like they bring you some joy for no reason. Don't put a
Yeah.
reason on it. Like don't explain it. It doesn't matter. Like just look around and find a rock, or do something silly, make a weird noise or whatever it is. Like, and if it feels weird, it feels like you're not supposed to do it. That's, I mean, aside from like illegal activity, if it feels like you're not supposed to do it, it's probably a reason to do it. Like if you feel weird, like, because even yesterday when I was finding rocks, I started like kind of shouting, just making some louder noises. And I'm not a very loud person. Like I'm
Mm.
not naturally loud, and it felt weird. And I didn't go super loud, so I knew that there was more. I was like, there's more to explore there. There's
Yeah.
more about being able to just yell or something. But like you said, it's little microwaves, not
Yeah.
microwaves, microways to do these things, to play in the world. Because I mean, it's not easy, and work does suck sometimes, and you do get too much put on your plate, and family stuff is hard, like, and societal stuff is hard. But I mean, that doesn't turn off the other side. And it's
Yeah.
hard to, you should, you shouldn't feel guilty for expressing that side. Like you said, give it space. Like that's such a good way of putting it.
The thing that's coming to my mind, and I just picked up the book because I'm going to try to find it really quick. There is this quote from Mirabai Starr
Oh,
that
she's the best.
who is just the best. I
She's
mean,
the best.
absolute delight of a human being, absolutely amazing. Um and she's one of the people, she's probably the first person who gave me an understanding, and we haven't touched upon this at all, but um I grew up in a very progressive household, both religiously and politically. And growing up, even though it was in a progressive church, my image of the divine was still Zeus in the sky,
Right.
right? And like throwing thunderbolts, just throwing thunderbolts for different reasons
Hmm.
than a lot of my like evangelical, recovering evangelical, whatever language they want to use, evangelical friends. And Mirabai was the first one. And so I've had to work through a lot of that. What is my image of the divine that's not that? Because that doesn't feel true to my experience. And there's a lot of mystics that have a very alternative understanding of the divine. And so Mirabai was the first one who said it so clearly in a way that made me realize my image of the divine based on my experience of the divine is deeply feminine.
Mm.
And I remember the day that hit me, And I remember I was sitting at a beach and I was just kind of watching the water. I had a little lunch box out and I had taken my shoes off. I'm just watching the water and I was reading and I saw that and I just paused and put the book down and looked out to the water and had this experience of that is why, like, that's the feeling of being held.
Mm.
It's that's the feeling of the divine for me, is that it has never been my understanding of a masculine force. It's been this big feminine hug, this mama bear hug. Um, and I just love Mirabai Star. I think she's one of the best modern mystics, and
Right.
not best as in good, bad, but best as in like able to communicate with such beauty and creativity that it strikes past your ego and actually makes it to your soul space.
100%. Yeah.
The quote, I'm not finding it, but she has this quote that says the world will be healed when you learn to sing and use your brush and shake your body and sing your heart out, something like that. And I
Right.
just think about that as that's creativity. The world
Mhm.
gets healed when we learn to play in a creative way. There
Right.
doesn't need to be reasons. There doesn't need to be
Right.
any of that. We just need to,
Yeah.
i want to I want to pick up this stick and put a feather on it
Right.
because
Uh-huh. Yeah, and what I love about that too is it doesn't have to stop at like silly little things. Like it's all creative. It's all
yeah,
creativity. It's all creation. Like the relationships you're forming are creative things. Are the conversations we're creating a thing right now. So this is play. So it almost takes to the point of like, of course, a lot of things need to be taken seriously, but also recognize that there's playfulness within them and within the creative experience. And it doesn't have to be an art piece.
yeah,
It can be a conversation, an inside joke. It can be anything. Like, and I when I realized that, when I was like, oh, it's all there's no create. This is creative and this is not. It's about like how we're looking at it. And
yeah,
like and I obviously Mirabai is the best and um I love that. I will agree with you just on a personal note that the image of the divine as feminine has been a powerful thing for me as well. There's I'm a big Kali person. I have Kali all over my wall behind me. I like the protective mother aspect too, like the one who's like she's not gonna she's gonna be there and she's not gonna let anybody mess
hmm.
around. And I love that. But to your point, there's another image. Are you familiar with Our Lady of Perpetual Help? That image?
No, I'm not. Bring it.
Okay, so this is from my little bit of research because I found the thing that struck me and I was like, that's true enough for me. So you could probably find alternate interpretations. But in this image of Our Lady of Perpetual Help, it has Mary holding an infant Jesus, but you always see infant Jesus like one of the sandals has fallen off, like he's falling off. So he has one shoe off, and then
Mm,
there's two angels above. And so the interpretation that I found that really struck a truth chord in me, cut through to the soul, like you said, was that the image is supposed to represent this being who is divine and human, who comes here and then he sees what he has like the angels tell him what he has to go through. Here's all the stuff you're going to see. Here's the suffering that you're going to deal with on a personal level. And he runs into the arms of the mother so fast because he's so scared that his shoe is falling off and he's like just thrown off and whatever, and she just holds him. And to me, like that meant so much because it's like, okay, so we come here and all of a sudden we realize, oh, this isn't easy.
mm,
And where do we go? Who can hold us? Who can hold all the humanity and all the divinity and all the things that are inside of us? But this mother, the universe, whatever you want to call it.
yeah.
And that image is like my favorite for that reason. I just had to share that based on what you were saying.
That's so good. That's
Mhm.
absolutely beautiful. I love that.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a very good one. And there's images like that everywhere. And like whatever strikes you, like this isn't
Yeah.
like this is the right way. And that's like find the thing that find the rock that you want to pick up. If you went to that same stream, you'd find different rocks. You might not pick up the chocolate filled one that has the little
Yeah.
brown spot. You might find a different one. And that's good too. Like,
Yeah.
so whatever image, whatever version, whatever song you want to sing loud, whatever it is, whatever relationship feels right, like, and this goes back to feeling like in our bodies and noticing what's being aware enough to be like, that's the rock I want, or
Yeah.
whatever it is. That's the image of the divine that I like, that feels comfortable for me. And
Yeah.
I just think that's such a cool and fun journey to take.
Yeah. Howard Thurman has one of his most famous, or at least one of the most shared teachings in the last 10, 15 years has been in 1980, he spoke at Spelman College and he talked about the sound of the genuine. And he says, within us, every one of us has the sound of the genuine that emanates up from within us. And there's so much traffic going on. There's so much stuff in our minds, in our day to day, our to do lists, that most of us have no idea what the sound even is. And yet, if we go down in ourselves, if we can learn to cultivate this capacity to hear the sound of the genuine emanating up from within us, if we go down in us, we can come up in another and
Mm.
realize that the sound of the genuine that both of us are making are the same sound. And I think about that with nature a lot. I think about that with people a lot as well. Especially my partner, I've shared that with. Just this experience of that's what it means to be fully seen as who you are and fully whole in a moment, is that I am in the depths. The sound of the genuine within me is fully emanating. And I'm in the depths so much that I realize that the sound of your genuine, is fully emanating. And it turns out it's the exact same song, and we can see each other eye to eye for exactly who we are.
I mean, it's unreal. And it's like, I mean, and that's like, isn't that basically the idea or the meaning behind namaste? Like, the light in me recognizes the light in
Yeah.
you. Like, these aren't new things. And it's not saying that all tenacious ideas are good, but there are some that are true enough that
Yeah.
for some reason humanity can't stop finding them.
Yeah.
And I love that. I like about going, deep enough down to come up as another, like, that's good stuff.
Yeah.
And
You know, I've been asked a few times, like, um, where does spirituality end and therapy begin for me?
mm,
And I think there's a lot of gray space for me, because for me, spirituality and therapy are different toolkits, but they're both centered around how do we see ourselves and the cosmos in a whole way, in a more true way, right? And so spirituality has a certain set of toolkits and other stuff to it. Therapy has a very specific set of tools. Um, but I think a lot of us in our spirituality, or I'll say religious spaces, a lot of us in our religious spaces growing up never were taught how to go into the depths of ourselves
mm,
in a way that allowed for us to become in contact with what Thomas Merton says is the true self, or the sound of the genuine emanating up. But a lot of us have gone to therapy and
mm.
been brought into some form of our depths and realized, oh shit, there is something beautiful here. There's a wounded child that needs my care and love. There is inherent dignity deep within me that I need to develop the capacity to attune to. And so in a lot of ways, I think therapy has really, I don't want to say replaced, therapy has been a practice for a lot of people who are deeply hurting. Especially, I think that's obvious, right? But
Right.
especially for those folks who grew up in a religious space that promised them depth and transcendence and connection with all that is, and then didn't follow through, or
Right.
didn't help build the capacity and the
Yeah.
toolkit for really getting the sense of, I have dignity, I have worth, because the
Well,
divine exists within me.
right. And just the idea of tools, having tools is such a big thing. And of course, I once had someone tell me that, we develop all these tools, and sometimes we, forget to like how to open the toolbox, and
Yeah.
sometimes, and you have to be okay with that too. And I can totally accept that. And I loved when she told me that, because it let me off the hook on the times that I couldn't figure something out in the moment. But just the idea of having tools, and tools that work for you, and trying them, like you said earlier,
Yeah.
journaling, or um whatever it is, being playful, or connecting with a friend, or therapy, or religious symbolism, like whatever the thing is. um Exploring those tools can be such a such a beneficial experience that I think, like you said, we don't really get taught.
Yeah. Yeah.
you know
And
it's Go ahead.
no, I was just thinking, and we're back because that's the intention, attention, repetition piece,
Hmm.
right? Like
Hmm.
exploring those tools over and over and over again when we need them, even when we don't need them, right? Like when
Right.
I'm home and I'm feeling settled, how can I still practice body settling or listening to
Mhm.
my body, right? Like,
Yeah.
um, but doing that over and over and over again, because that's what builds our resiliency and capacity for the moments that we really need it.
Yeah, and you said one word there that I like to use as kind of a mantra sometimes, is just listening. I'm always
Yeah.
like, I'm listening. And it's easy to forget to listen, so that's why the mantra has me reminded. Um, and it sucks sometimes, because sometimes you're like, well, I don't hear anything. Like, I don't, where's the thing? Where's the next sign? And where's the feeling? I don't like this. But at the same time, I'm just listening. And then whether that be like, you know like you said, how do I feel, like how's my body
Mhm.
feel, or how did maybe that conversation earlier impact me, or why don't I feel anything about that conversation, like
Yeah.
maybe something happened and you're like, I'm fine, why am I, and like, let's go let's go with that. Not to say still don't watch Seinfeld and do your thing, but like, yeah, there's something to be said about just listening,
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
yeah.
So much. Yes.
Yeah. So I think we're creeping in on an hour. So I'm gonna end this sort of, or I'm gonna give you two more questions. You probably, if you, I think you listened to the Belden episode, so these are the same questions I gave him. But one being, uh, I know you've already given us kind of a lot, but I'm going to give you another opportunity to do so, because one of the reasons I started this is because I want to have the experience, but I also just want to share things that I think are valuable and important and interesting, because we all like to share. We're like,
Yeah.
look at my rocks I found. So, is there anything? It can be a song, it can be a practice, it can be a book, it can be a poem, anything at all. It can be a food. I don't, doesn't matter at all. If you were just like, hey guys, you should try this. This thing worked for me, or I love this thing. What would you suggest? What would you share?
I am going to share a band.
Okay,
Um,
cool.
and there's some humorous backstory. So the band is Bird Talker.
Okay.
And the only backstory you really need, and this is why it's humorous for me, and a smile just like erupted on my face, is a bunch of the people who come to my workshops and like have come to like many of my workshops, they always give me a hard time because I almost always have Bird Talker as some sort of a song playing in the background, or I'll have a Bird Talker shirt on. It's almost
Mhm.
become like the Easter egg of
Right.
part of my
Yeah.
workshops.
Hmm.
So I will publicly say that Bird Talker is such a good band. I see them every time they're here. They're a little band out of Nashville, and they're just I've very rarely heard an indie band that does so well bringing deep spiritual meaning. I don't know if they would say that, but deep spiritual meaning into their music, that it just explores the human experience so beautifully.
Okay, that's perfect. And I think you mentioned them in your book too.
Oh,
So there,
100%. Yeah.
yeah. So, and and I'm going to give you this because I feel that 100%. I haven't listened to them yet, even though I saw that in your book. Uh, but I can't tell you the number. There's a handful, but the bands that have been a major part of my understanding of myself and my understanding of spirituality, or whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
self-reflection. There's a couple bands in my experience that have been the same. There's a band called Anathema, who's one of them. Another band called Cynic. Those are two, just in case people are making a playlist from this from this episode. But yeah, I love that, because it's so true for me. Music
Mm,
is, it's one of those things that I feel like there's there's if a song will hit me and I'll well up or something,
Yeah.
oftentimes to me I've recognized that as like, oh, they said some level of truth, something true
Yeah.
just happened. And that's the same with comedy. You laugh because you are like, oh, I get it. I get it means it feels true to you. So when an emotion erupts, there's truth there. And I feel like that's so good. So I'm excited to see if I can find some of those in Bird Talker.
Yeah, here's a random practice for you.
Okay.
I mentioned it earlier. I said part of it. I really strongly believe that art and metaphor, what they do for us is that they slip past our ego defense systems and they speak to that essence within us. So a practice for you is whatever song makes you cry, whatever piece of artwork draws your eye in a way that's beyond your brain, right? Whenever you feel like, oh, this is touching me deeply, right? Ask yourself, what story do I have that's underneath this moment? What story do I have that's underneath this feeling or experience? Yeah.
I'm gonna honestly, there's so many songs that it's gonna take me all of 2023 to do that practice, because there's even stuff, and it's funny because there's even like, a phrase in a song. Like there's some that
Mm-hmm.
are popping in my head right now that's just these three words that
Yeah.
were enough. That I mean, I can think of a time where it happened at work and I had to like go to the bathroom to like be like, uh-oh,
Yep.
like this is hitting me way too real right now. And it was three words and it's just like, oh my goodness. So I love that. So yeah, just what story do I have
Yeah.
associated with how that hit me? That's very good. So you gave us a practice and a band. So you gave us two. I'm into that. So my last question is we've seen Peter Pan, the Lost Boys who go to Neverland. They have a happy thought and they sprinkle some pixie dust, but we're not going to talk about pixie dust. Their happy thought is what helps them fly, the thing that brings them joy and makes them light. You know what I mean? Like makes them lift off. If I put you on the spot and ask you what would be your happy thought?
Oh, holy shit.
Mhm.
Not that. That's not it.
Yeah.
That's not the
Oh,
happy thought.
yeah. I like
Although
to
maybe
curse
that
a
is.
lot. Yeah. Cursing rules.
um I think the happy thought is and it's a transitional thought for me, but it's a practice I have also. When I go out walking every day, part of that is that I work in cubicle space where I'm like, I need to get out of here. So I go for
Mhm.
walks, and part of that is nature is where I feel most connected. um and what I have started saying to myself and really thinking it is, wow, there's beauty here.
Mm.
And it's a transitional phrase for me because it transitions me to paying attention. But the other part of it is that it brings me a lot of joy because no matter what story I'm telling myself in that moment, and I do a lot of like, um, when I'm out walking, I slip so easily into fantasizing about the future or like replaying incidents that I've gone through over and over. And so, what that phrase does for me is it gets my eyes wide open again and then just like happy. Like, no matter what
Mhm.
is going on, this right here, like that duck is dope. And I'm happy
Right.
to be watching
Right.
that duck right now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that's what I would say is, oh, wow, there's beauty here.
I'm gonna take that as dope ducks. That's
Yes.
how that's how I heard it. So
Yeah.
that's how I'll promote this whenever I put it out. It's like we talk about dope ducks and bird talker. So that's awesome. That's a good one though, man. Anything that can kind of be a little bit of a tiny reset button,
Yeah.
is, just like that little swipe where it cleans off the lens a little bit and you're just like, oh yeah, okay. Sorry, I was gone for a second, but I'm back.
But I'm
Like
back. Yeah.
that's very cool. Well, I didn't look at my list of questions at all, but I think we touched everything that I wanted to. This was super fun. I'm really glad you came on. I will is there anything else you want to share that you want people to know or anything?
Um, yeah, if y'all want to like connect with me, my website's andrewglang.com or I'm on Instagram at andrewglang. Other than that, like I hope everyone's having a good day. Go look at some
Right.
ducks.
Right. Ducks are dope, bro.
Ducks are dope.
All right, man. Cool. Well, thanks a lot, dude. I will talk to you later.
All right. Thank you.
See you, dude.